That's a sign of trouble and of decline. And you better pay attention and you better do something because it isn't going to go away. It hasn't gone away for the last 30 to 40 years, and there's no sign of it going away now. The world economy is changing. The dominant position of the United States is no longer the case. That's the reality. Now the question is, when will we have the political leadership to face it, to explain it to the American people, and to begin to work out a plan for how to handle this situation? And by plan, I don't mean threatening nuclear war or any of those other quote-unquote solutions that are worse than the problem being presented. That's a momentous transformation. It means that the center driving dynamic part of the world economy is no longer Europe, North America, and all of that. That has moved on. The dynamic of capitalism, which started in England and then moved to other parts of the world, which started in New England in the United States, Western Hemisphere, and then moved on. You know where it's gone now? To Asia, and it is on the route to going to Latin America and Africa too. 40 years ago, if you made a list of the poorest countries in the world, China would have been on it. China for a long time has been one of the poorest countries on this planet. And 40 years ago, the people of China, like the people in most of the countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, had a clear priority, the one thing they wanted above all else, and that was to stop being the poorest countries in the world.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. This is your presenter Agentic Stories, and I hope that you're fine wherever you are today. Now, I'm here to address something that I believe it's important to everyone, because the United States is almost doing bad in everything. It's sucking at everything, right? And people are asking themselves, where did this rain start beating Americans? Now, in today's presentation, I have an American professor called he's a Marxian, and he has encouraged socialism over the capitalist system and how the few super rich people, the elites, are trying to control the United States and everything. And so I believe that his stance on these topics are really, really important. And with that, in fact, is that before just jumping right to the video, is that I recognize the current situations that is happening in the United States, and like everything is getting expensive, including housing, healthcare system, and everything, and it's getting crazy day and day, right? And now the fear of being wiped out economically, this is a fear that it's dawning to a number of Americans, and some people are already leaving the United States, looking at different places that they could go. Some people are going to other places, some people are visiting Africa, some people are trying like different things, and people have come with sentiments that they have seen life changing while they leave the United States to go to different places. This is something that they have seen, and so it goes in line with what Dr. Richard DeWolf is trying to say. Americans will soon be wiped out economically. They'll be rendered useless. But again, you ask yourself this question: America itself is just here to sorry about that. America itself is here to make huge investments in digital assets like crypto. Do you think that this is gonna change the face of America on how it's being perceived economically? Because the BRICS are ditching the US dollar. Do we see like the crypto investment that Mr. Donald Trump is here to jump right into will make a big difference? Buckle up for this video by Richard DeWolf. I think that it's important, and with that, I'm also going to be giving you reasons as to why I think and I agree with what Dr. Richard DeWolf is trying to say about the United States. And buckle up for the video. I hope it's educational. It changes your perspective in some things, and all in all, this video is not to fearmonger, but the essence of this video is to show you the perspective, is to show you the light, and how you can come up with ways that can sustain yourself in this harsh economic condition, because it's being said that this is just the beginning of what is yet to come. But how can we manage this? What are the solutions? How can we maneuver this? Let's dive right into the video. I'll be back. If you're watching this video for the first time, I'll most definitely appreciate you if you could take just a second to subscribe to the channel, join our membership, and really get to see what it can offer you. If you wish to buy me a coffee, you can check out my Cash App account. It's on my bio. Until then, let's dive right into the video. I'll be back.
Have what we used to call economic development, so they could have decent jobs, decent incomes, provide education, healthcare, and decent housing for their families, for their communities, and for their nation. And 40 years ago, if you had talked to the leaders of any of the countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, they would have told you that's their top priority. Well, 40 years later, I'm going to tell you the results. Far and away, the most successful poor country to overcome its poverty has been the People's Republic of China. Well, here we are. And what has happened has been that the United States now faces, for the first time in a century, an economic competitor. Big, powerful, highly developed, and able to outcompete the United States across the board, from the lowest to the highest technology which either side is capable of. That's the reality. For most of the last 40 years, their economy grew at about 6 to 9%. Their GDP, gross domestic product, a rough measure of the total output of goods and services, it grew 6 to 9% per year. The United States, over the same period, grew 2 to 3% per year. No contest. Over 40 years, that kind of difference means that China catches up to the United States, which it did. In a number of areas, it has now surpassed the United States. Here is the truth about China, whether you like the place or not, whether you agree with it or not. Those are perfectly valid issues, and people can take the different sides. But make-believe and denial of what's going on is a bad idea for everyone. Not only have the Chinese outgrown us, but they have built an alliance with other countries that are recognizing that what was true for the last 75 years, a global economy dominated by the United States as the country that came out of World War II with no bombs that fell on it other than Pearl Harbor, and less damage than any other developed country. China is a hybrid between the US and the Soviet Union, different from both situations. And it turns out that under the leadership of the Chinese Mao Zedong and the ones that have come since him, it turns out this hybrid organization can grow faster than any other economic system the world has ever seen. For the last 30 years, China has grown its economy, its GDP, its gross domestic product, between 6 and 9% per year. During that time, the United States GDP grew between 2 and 3% a year. It doesn't take rocket science to understand that if you can manage that difference, because it's a mix, if China can grow 2 to 3 times faster than the United States for 30 years, it can do what it has now done. Namely, it's caught up. Today, the United States has a competitor economically. We haven't had one for a century. The reason the American middle class is gone is because the capitalist employers of America got more profit by moving production to China. China didn't make that decision. They did. If you really want to protect the American job, you can't let the capitalist employer do what they want for profit. But our bought politicians, left and right, can't say it. And the mantra was the reverse of the New Deal. Instead of calling the government in to give capitalism a human face, people stumbled over one another, led by the Republicans, but tragically followed by the Democrats, to roll the government back, to get the government out of the economy, to go back to a capitalism which, if I may be allowed to continue the metaphor, lacks a human face, as the songs we just heard today document. And over the last 50 years, the government not only didn't regulate the way it once did, didn't intervene the way it once did, but it blessed the decision of corporate America to go where the profits were the greatest. And where were profits the greatest? Answer: China. Starting in the 1970s, we had a mammoth exodus. And not like the one in the Bible. No, this was an exodus of American corporate leaders. They had graduated from business school where they had been taught, parentheses, I have taught in business schools myself. I know the curriculum. They were taught, if you want to succeed in business, go to where the wages are low and the market is expanding. The place where the wages were low and the market was expanding the most was in the land called the People's Republic of China. And American corporations, British and French and German and Italian and Japanese, they all went to China, where they were welcomed, where they were celebrated. And over the last 40 to 50 years, the Chinese economy grew. About half the economy there is capitalist, private companies working pretty much the way they do here. China's going nowhere. China is growing. By the way, lest you think any of this is in the past, let me give you right now what the rate of growth of economic output is for 2024, this year. These I'm about to give you are the estimates of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which monitors all of this. Economic growth for the United States, 2024, will be 2.8%, right on target with what it's been on and off for a long time. The economic growth of People's Republic of China this year will be 4.8%, nearly double. And the economic growth of India will be 7%. Folks, there is no contest anymore. It's over. There is a new major player in the world, and they're having a conference right now that should be the single most important issue on our front pages, on our social media, because this is changing everything. Every country, every business is calculating, whoa, where do we shift our investments? Where do we try to source our inputs? Where do we look for markets in a changing world that has now really reached an inflection point, a big shift? That's going on, whether we admit it or face it or we don't. American empire is over. And we ought to be paying attention so we can try to avoid catastrophe as we decline, because that's what we face. You can go out with agreements that allow everybody to have their chance. We were never the only player, and now we can't even pretend, however desperately we try. The BRICS is the agenda we need to learn. Otherwise, we will stumble into one disaster after another. Ukraine and Israel, Palestine, ought to be warning signs of the kinds of mistakes you can make when you think you are what you no longer are. Take heed. The alternative is something you don't want to have to face. The next time you hear an American politician or you read in an American newspaper how the American economy is doing better than anyone in the world, please remember the word denial. That kind of statement, which I encounter almost every day, is the exact equivalent of a toddler putting fingers in front of her eyes or nose in hoping that the scary dog will go away.
Hello, welcome back to the channel. Having heard what the professor himself has said, I think it's important for us to also recognize the marking factors of things that he has talked about, that I believe it's important because he addresses issues that are affecting the majority of Americans, speaking of large portion of them being the working class. And then there is this question of, now, what's the fate, what's the future? Having to understand that everything which is happening in the United States, like right now, might even get worsened. And as I said, this video is not for fear mongering, but it's to show you a way that you can maneuver this. Now, before just jumping right into that, there are a couple of things that I have to recognize that also Richard DeWalt says that I think I need to put stress on. And the first one is systemic inequality. And know that the United States is built, its asset is built in the systemic inequality, where we have an oligarchy, few people ruling, majority of people are the working class who are always working for these rich people, right? And now you need to understand that wealth highlights wealth income in inequality America are historic heights. And it's true, a small percentage of the population owns disproportionately a share of wealth, while the majority struggles with the stagnant wages, rising debts, and limited savings. This concentration of wealth hinders economic growth and creates a fragile economy where the majority cannot afford basic needs. And that's where the United States is heading. We have few filthy rich people, and majority of people are even struggling just to get food. That's where the United States is heading. And who are the majority? Majority are the people who can't afford to put food on the table. If we say that Americans will be wiped out economically, this is what we mean. This is what happens because the United States is creating a systemic inequality. And this is something that it did, and history has shown this over time, right? And when it keeps perpetuating the same scenario, the same situation, it always wants to make you just be where you are. Because one thing with the United States, it promotes consumerism. There is always one thing with ownership, with owning and owning. You want to have luxury things, it's okay, you can afford that and all those things, but at which expense? What investments are you doing as a person? What are you doing? Like, I'm injecting a lot of cash in me, right? But what am I doing for myself? What if tomorrow I'm waking up and I'm being sacked at the job? Where will I get the other money? Now that's what you need to understand. The States tries to teach you the culture of consumerism without knowing that you can also be a creator, you can also be a producer. If you add this on top on systemic inequality that has been there for the longest time, trust me, this is what happens. What happens is that you have few rich people who owns factors of production, the monopolistic nature of corporations, and that's what they get you. They produce. You, as a citizen of the United States, your work is just to buy. The moment you realize you buy a lot of things that you don't want with the money that you don't have, and that's how painful it is. Another thing that I would like to address is stagnant wages versus rising costs. Stagnant wages versus rising costs. You know very well that this has been an issue, especially in the United States. We have inflation rates which are so high. The economic frame of the United States is not good. BRICS is just ditching the dollar, and has been happening, right? The United States is to stand for himself. The United States is to stand by himself, right? Now, everyone is pushing these laws to the consumer. You, the consumer, you, the buyer. This is what Wolf says that Wolf argues that real wages for most Americans have stagnated since 1970s, while costs of housing, education, and healthcare have skyrocketed. This forces individuals to rely on debt, which is student loans, credit cards, mortgages, to maintain their standards of living, creating unsustainable financial conditions. This is something that you know. Third thing that I'm going to be talking about is corporate greed and capitalism's failures. Anytime you hear about corporate greed, definitely we're going to be talking about capitalism. That's a sure bet, right? Now, in Wolf's critique, capitalism prioritizes corporate profit over well-being of their workers. Corporates cut costs through outsourcing and automation, leaving many Americans unemployed or underemployed, emphasizing how the push for profits exacerbates environmental degradation and deterioration infrastructure and exploitative labor practices. That's what it does to the economy. And when we have few people, the oligarchy, when we have few people who controls, who owns, who practice these monopolistic behaviors, just look at the case scenario of United Health, the insurance company, which is still having a case until today, like right now when we are talking, right? You understand that that's a classical example of what you're talking about. At the expenses of the workers, at the expenses of the people who are supposed to be insured against risk which are associated with the afflictions that they are going through. But if you hear the stories of these people, they'll tell you that the companies are gaining at the expense of people who are always funding them, who are always buying their products, who are always buying their services. But at what? At their expense, because these people don't care about anything. The fourth thing that I'm going to be addressing is decline of public investment. Walls frequently note that the failure of the US government to invest adequately in essential services like education, healthcare, and infrastructure, and green energy. This neglect weakens the country's global competitiveness and reduces the quality of lives for its citizens. Talking about globalization and job losses, this is something that has been happening for a long time, right? You ask yourself, why is America getting worse in everything? America is getting worse in everything. One is polarized politics. Wolf is a critique of political system for being dominated by corporate interests, which prevents meaningful reforms to address economic and social issues. Anything you see around is being engineered by these corporates. America is so huge in debt dependency. That's the second argument that Wolf gives why America is getting worse in everything. Americans and the US government are heavily reliant on debt, creating vulnerabilities in times of economic downturn. Third is diminishing global influence. As an emerging economies like China rise, America's dominance is waning. This has economic, geopolitical, and psychological impacts on people. Cultural decay as another factor. Wolf also touches on societal aspects, including decline of education standards and increasing social unrest and as consequences of economic despair. And it's true, because just recently 5 elementary schools are being closed down. Just recently, 2 days ago, this is something which happened. And yep, Question: America is yet to diversify. It's yet to integrate the use of cryptocurrency into its system. Do you think this can be a good change for the United States? Do you think things will turn in the favor of the United States? Tell me what you think about this in the comment section. Again, as usually know, this is a presenter Agent Stories, and I'm hoping to see you in my next video. Until then, let's see each other in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony.